2 years after the swarm's first attack. The last Vrix organisms were finally driven back into dark space, retreating to the void between galaxies where humanity couldn't follow. The war was over, but the galaxy it left behind was fundamentally changed. 300 council species had been completely exterminated. 200 more had lost their homeworlds. Trillions of beings were dead, and entire sectors of space were littered with debris and lifeless worlds. The Council called an emergency session to address the crisis and extended a formal invitation to humanity to attend. This time, when the human delegates arrived at the Council ring, there were no questions about their history or their nature. There was only silence as Sarah Okonkwo, now 75 and walking with a slight limp from an injury during the evacuation of Earth's embassy on a contested world, led her people to the central platform, the Council speaker, a new one since the previous had died in the swarm attacks, addressed them with what sounded like genuine humility. Humanity of Earth, the Galactic Council owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. You came to our aid when we had rejected you. You fought with courage and skill that saved billions of lives. In recognition of your sacrifice and your strength, the Council offers you full membership with all rights and privileges, effective immediately. We also offer formal apologies for our previous judgment of your species. Sarah stood before the assembled species, feeling the weight of every eye upon her. She thought about all the humans who had died fighting for species that had called them too dangerous. She thought about the 50 years of isolation and struggle. She thought about the young people like Marcus Webb who had grown up behind a wall built by others' fear. "Thank you for your offer," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translator systems. "And thank you for your apology. But we must decline." The silence that followed was absolute. Every being in the chamber seemed frozen in shock. Sarah continued, her words measured and firm. 50 years ago, you looked at humanity and saw only our capacity for violence. You judged us unworthy and locked us away. When violence came to your worlds, you called us back, not because you had changed your minds about us, but because you needed what you had condemned us for. You needed our violence. You needed our willingness to fight and die. You needed the very nature you had rejected. She paused, looking around at the hundreds of species. We don't blame you for your fear. Our history is violent. We have done terrible things, but we have also learned from them. We have grown. We have become something more than what we were. And we did all of that not with your help, but despite your rejection? A Cathari delegate spoke up, its voice uncertain. Then what do you want from us? Nothing, Sarah said simply. We want nothing from the Council. What we want is to build something new. Something better. We're returning to our space now, but we're not going back behind the wall. We're opening our borders to any species that wants to join us in building a different kind of civilization. One based not on 50,000 years of tradition, but on merit, cooperation, and mutual defense. We're calling it the Terran Compact. Another delegate, a Velastri whose crystalline structure showed signs of combat damage, asked, "Why would anyone join you instead of remaining with the Council?" Marcus Webb, who had been invited to attend as a representative of the military, spoke up from behind Sarah. "Because we offer what the Council couldn't, real protection. When the next crisis comes, and it will come, we'll be ready. We won't need months to mobilize. We won't debate whether fighting is too uncivilized. We'll do what needs to be done." The session ended without resolution, but that didn't matter. Humanity wasn't asking for permission anymore. They were offering an alternative. The first species to join the compact was Thessalon, the world Marcus had helped defend. Their ambassador came to the newly constructed compact assembly station, orbiting in neutral space between Sol and Council territory, and formally requested membership. Within days, others followed. Small species who had felt marginalized in the Council's hierarchy. Younger species who hadn't been given positions of authority. Even some established species who had lost faith in the Council's ability to protect them within 5 years. The Terran Compact had 200 member species. Within 10, that number had grown to 300. The Compact offered things the Council never had, advanced human technology shared freely. economic opportunities beyond rigid traditional roles, and most importantly, military protection backed by proven capability. Sarah retired from active diplomacy but stayed on as an advisor. She watched with satisfaction as the compact grew, not through conquest or coercion, but through simple demonstration of competence and vision. Humans worked alongside aliens, sharing knowledge and resources. The compact assembly became a place where any species, regardless of size or history, could have a voice. The Council watched their influence shrink with growing alarm. Their economy stagnated as species left for compact opportunities. Their military, which they had tried to rebuild after the war, couldn't compete with compact's battle-tested forces. Their authority crumbled as their moral superiority was questioned. How could they claim to be enlightened when they had needed barbarians to save them? Some council species adapted, reforming their governments and updating their approaches. Others clung to tradition, insisting that the compact was temporary and that proper civilization would eventually prevail. But the trend was clear. By 20 years after the war, the Terran Compact controlled 60% of known space and represented over 400 species. Marcus Webb, now an admiral himself, commanded the Compact's 3rd Defense Fleet. He patrolled the borders of compact space, always watchful for the return of the swarm or other threats. His crews were mixed now, humans working alongside Thessalonians, Velastri, and dozens of other species. They trained together, fought together, and proved that the Compact's ideal of cooperation wasn't just propaganda. On the 25th anniversary of the banishment, Sarah was invited to speak at a ceremony on Earth. She was 100 years old now, kept alive by medical technology that had advanced even further during the Compact's growth. She stood in the same hall where she had once delivered the news of humanity's rejection, and she looked out at the crowd of humans and aliens who had come to mark the occasion. 25 years ago, she began, we stood at this podium and told you that we had been judged and found wanting, that the galaxy had looked at us and decided we were too dangerous to be trusted. Some of you wanted to prove them wrong through peace. Others wanted revenge. In the end, we chose a third path. We proved them wrong by being exactly what they needed when they needed it most. She gestured to the alien delegates in the audience. But more than that, we proved that humanity's strength isn't just in our weapons or our willingness to fight. It's in our ability to adapt, to learn, to grow, and to help others do the same. The Compact isn't a human empire. It's a partnership of species who have chosen to work together because they see the value in cooperation over hierarchy, in merit over tradition, in action over endless debate. An elderly Cathari ambassador, one of the few who had voted against humanity's banishment all those years ago, stood to speak. I was wrong, he said, his voice carrying the weight of age and regret. Not about humanity's capacity for violence. That was real and undeniable. But I was wrong to think that capacity defined you. I failed to see your capacity for growth, for compassion, for building rather than just destroying. The galaxy is better because you were given the chance to prove yourselves, even if that chance came at a terrible cost. Sarah nodded in acknowledgement. The cost was terrible. We lost millions in the war. The galaxy lost trillions. But from that sacrifice, something new was born. The Compact represents a different way forward. One that doesn't reject species for their flaws, but helps them grow beyond those flaws. The ceremony ended with the dedication of a memorial to those who had died fighting the swarm. Human names and alien names were carved together in stone from Earth, Mars, and dozens of other worlds. They had died as separate species but would be remembered as comrades. In orbit above Earth, the Compact Assembly Station grew larger every year, a massive structure that now rivaled the Council Ring in size. It was built in a completely different style, though. Where the Council Ring was elegant and ancient, the Assembly was functional and modern, a reflection of the different philosophies behind each organization. Marcus walked through the Assembly's halls, past conference rooms where humans and aliens debated policy, past training centers where mixed-species military units prepared for future threats, past schools where children of a dozen species learned together. This was what humanity had built from isolation and rejection. Not an empire of conquest, but an alliance of mutual respect and shared purpose. He found Sarah in her office, looking out at Earth through the window. The planet had recovered from the population strain of the isolation years, with billions living in orbital habitats while Earth itself was carefully maintained as humanity's historical home. "Do you think the Council will ever join us?" he asked. Sarah smiled slightly. "Some of them already have, quietly." The first volley from the human fleet lit up space like a newborn star. 2,000 warships firing simultaneously, their weapon systems calibrated for maximum destruction rather than the Council's preferred approach of minimal force. Plasma lances cut through space in brilliant blue-white lines, each one hot enough to vaporize anything it touched. Nuclear cluster munitions deployed in clouds, each warhead seeking its own target. Railgun rounds, accelerated to a fraction of light speed, punched through Vrix organisms like bullets through paper. The swarm had never faced anything like this before. In all their consumption across multiple galaxies, they had encountered species that tried to defend themselves, but none that attacked with such focused, efficient brutality. The human weapons weren't designed to disable or capture. They were designed to kill, and they did their job with terrifying effectiveness. Commander Marcus Webb watched from the bridge of the Unbowed as his squadron dove into the swarm formation. His weapons officer was a young woman named Lisa Park, and she called out targets with the calm precision of someone who had trained for this moment her entire life. Targets locked. Firing missiles. The Unbowed shuddered as it released its payload. 40 missiles streaked away, each one guided by combat AI that could adjust to enemy movements faster than any organic mind. The missiles didn't target the largest organisms or the most threatening ones. They targeted the nodes, the central organisms that coordinated swarm behavior. The humans had studied the recordings from council battles and identified the pattern. The swarm wasn't just a collection of creatures. It was a network, and networks had weak points. The missiles hit their targets within seconds. Explosions blossomed across space as 40 node organisms died. Suddenly, nearly 10,000 Vrix organisms lost coordination. They drifted, confused, easy prey for the human ships that were already adjusting fire. "This is working," Marcus said, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. "Target the next cluster of nodes. Keep disrupting their network." Across the battlefield, other human ships were implementing the same strategy. The Council had fought the swarm as if each organism was an individual enemy. Humanity fought it as a system, identifying and destroying the connections that made it strong. It was the kind of tactical thinking that came from a species that had spent thousands of years fighting wars against other intelligent enemies. Admiral Zhao watched the battle unfold on his tactical display. The human fleet was taking losses, ships destroyed by overwhelming swarm numbers, but the ratio was in humanity's favor. For every human ship destroyed, they were taking out hundreds of Vrix organisms. More importantly, they were driving the swarm back. A communication came through from one of the council commanders, a Velastri admiral whose crystalline structure was fractured from stress. "Human fleet, your tactics are effective but horrifically violent. You're causing massive destruction." Zhao almost laughed. "Admiral, that's the point. You can't negotiate with this enemy. You can't disable it and hope it learns its lesson. You can only destroy it before it destroys you. But the collateral damage is acceptable compared to the alternative," Zhao cut him off. "If you want to survive this, you need to stop thinking like peacekeepers and start thinking like soldiers. Now either help us fight or get your evacuation ships out of the combat zone." The Velastri went silent. Zhao felt a moment of regret for his harsh words, but there was no time for gentleness. Every second they delayed meant more innocent people dying. The Battle of Kelros lasted 18 hours. The human fleet rotated ships in and out of combat, maintaining constant pressure on the swarm. They used tactics the Council had never seen, coordinated strikes where entire squadrons focused fire on single targets, false retreats that lured swarm organisms into kill zones, even kamikaze drones that flew directly into the largest organisms and detonated, fusion warheads. When the swarm finally withdrew, pulling back to regroup and adapt to this new threat. The humans had won the first major victory against the Vrix since the invasion began. 300 human ships had been destroyed, 30,000 personnel dead. But the swarm had lost nearly 500,000 organisms, and Kelros sector was saved. The Council fleet limped away to regroup, their crews stunned by what they'd witnessed. The human fleet didn't celebrate. They immediately began repairs, restocked ammunition, and prepared for the next battle. Admiral Zhao sent scout ships to track the swarm's movements and reported back to Earth. First engagement successful. Enemy withdrawing. We're pursuing. Sarah Okonkwo received the message on Mars and felt relief mixed with dread. They'd won, but at a cost. 300 ships, 30,000 lives. And this was just the beginning. She authorized the deployment of Second Fleet, another 1,000 ships, to reinforce the first. Humanity was committed now. Over the following months, the human fleet pushed deeper into Council space, following the swarm and engaging it wherever it tried to establish new feeding zones. They fought above planets with populations in the billions, buying time for evacuations. They fought in asteroid fields, using the terrain to their advantage. They fought in the void between stars. Long pursuits that lasted days as they hunted down retreating swarm elements. The Council watched in amazement and horror as humans demonstrated every form of warfare they had ever developed. Boarding parties in powered armor stormed infested space stations, clearing them room by room with weapons that would have been illegal under Council law. The biological warfare specialists deployed viruses designed to attack silicon-based life, turning the swarm's own biology against it. Electronic warfare teams hacked into swarm communication systems, sending false signals that caused organisms to attack each other. Captain Maria Santos, whose ghost ship had first detected the swarm, now led reconnaissance missions deep into swarm-controlled space. Her ship and crew mapped out swarm hive clusters, identified staging areas, and provided intelligence that human commanders used to plan devastating strikes. On one mission, her crew discovered a massive swarm breeding facility on a moon in the Tartarus system. "Command, this is Whisper," she transmitted back. "We've found what looks like a swarm factory. They're growing new organisms here, maybe 1,000,000 a day. If we take this out, we could slow their reproduction significantly." Admiral Zhao's response was immediate. "Can you mark targeting coordinates?" "Already done?" "Then get clear. We're sending in the heavy weapons." Maria pulled her ship back to a safe distance and watched as human heavy cruisers arrived in system. They didn't bother with precision strikes. They targeted the moon itself, hitting it with enough nuclear firepower to crack it apart. The swarm facility was obliterated, along with nearly 2 million developing organisms. It was brutal, excessive, and exactly the kind of total warfare that the Council had always feared from humanity. But it worked. 8 months after the first engagement at Kelros, the swarm was in retreat across multiple sectors. They had lost more organisms than they could replace, and their network coordination was failing as humans systematically destroyed node organisms. The Council species that had survived the initial invasion began to emerge from their shelters and bunkers, looking at the human ships that patrolled their skies with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Marcus Webb found himself assigned to patrol duty over the planet Thessalon, a world that had been partially consumed before human forces drove the swarm away. He watched through his viewscreen as the survivors below tried to rebuild their cities. They had lost nearly 1 billion people, but billions more had survived because human ships had arrived in time. His communication officer looked up from her station. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's a message of thanks from the Thessalon government." Marcus listened to the message, hearing the genuine gratitude in the alien voice. It felt strange. For 50 years, humanity had been told they were too dangerous, too violent, too broken to be trusted. Now those same species were thanking them for the very violence they'd been condemned for. "Send a response," he said. "Tell them they're welcome. Tell them we'll keep watching their skies until the threat is gone." As his officer transmitted the message, Marcus thought about what his generation had learned during the isolation years. The Council had been wrong to think humanity's capacity for violence was a flaw. It was a tool like any other. What mattered was how you used it. They had learned to use it to protect rather than to conquer, to defend rather than to destroy for its own sake. The swarm wasn't defeated yet, but it was bleeding, retreating back toward the galactic rim where it had entered. Human casualties had climbed to over 12 million dead, 40% losses across all military branches. But not once had any human unit surrendered or retreated without orders. They fought with a determination that seemed incomprehensible to Council species, who couldn't understand why anyone would continue fighting after taking such heavy losses. Sarah understood it, though. She watched the casualty reports come in and felt the weight of every name. But she also understood that this was what humanity did. They endured. They sacrificed. They kept fighting even when the cost seemed too high. Because the alternative was worse, the galaxy was learning what it meant to have humans as allies rather than prisoners. The ghost ship Whisper detected them first, hidden in the darkness between galaxies where no one had any reason to look. Captain Maria Santos had been running surveillance near Council space for 3 months, her tiny ship's stealth systems keeping her invisible to the blockade stations. She was about to return home when her long-range sensors picked up something that made no sense. Objects, millions of them, moving through the void at speeds that should have been impossible for anything biological. And they were heading straight toward the galaxy. She sent the data back to Sol on a tight beam transmission and waited. 12 hours later, the reply came back. Keep watching, but stay hidden. Find out what these things are. Maria watched through her telescopes as the objects drew closer to Council space. They looked organic, like enormous insects made of silicon and metal, each one the size of a cruiser. They moved in perfect coordination, millions acting as one. When they reached the first Council outpost, a mining station on the edge of the Viridian sector, they fell upon it like locusts on a wheat field. The station's shields lasted 18 seconds. Then the swarm tore it apart, consuming every piece of metal, every scrap of technology, every living being. In 4 minutes, there was nothing left but empty space. The swarm moved on, already heading toward the next target. Maria sent another transmission home. They eat everything. They're heading deeper into Council space. This is going to be bad. She was wrong. It wasn't bad. It was apocalyptic. The Vrix swarm, as the Council scientists would eventually name them, swept through the outer sectors like a wave of destruction. They didn't communicate, didn't negotiate, didn't even seem to acknowledge that the beings they were consuming were alive. They simply ate and multiplied and moved on. The Council's initial response was confused and slow. They sent diplomatic ships first, trying to make contact. The swarm consumed them. They sent defense fleets next, with orders to disable and capture specimens for study. The swarm tore the fleets apart in minutes. The ships were too slow, the crews too hesitant. The tactics too focused on minimizing casualties rather than achieving victory. Within 2 months, 37 Council species had been completely exterminated. Entire worlds stripped bare of all biological and technological matter, leaving behind dead rocks orbiting silent stars. The Morphians, those ancient beings who had been so eloquent in condemning humanity, were gone. 80,000 years of civilization, erased in 3 weeks as the swarm consumed their homeworld and all their colonies. The Council finally mobilized for total war, but they didn't know how to fight one. Their largest battle fleet assembled at the Kelros sector, a defensive line protecting 50 densely populated worlds. 3,000 Council ships faced down a swarm force of nearly 1 million organisms. The battle lasted 6 hours, and when it was over, the Council fleet was scattered and broken. Kelros sector began its evacuation, but there wasn't enough time. In Sol system, Sarah Okonkwo sat in the war room deep beneath Olympus station on Mars. Watching the reports come in through the ghost ships, the holographic display showed the swarm's advance in real time, a red stain spreading across the galactic map. "They're dying out there," Admiral Chunzhao said, his voice flat. He was Marcus Webb's uncle. a career military officer who had spent his entire life preparing for a war that might never come. Now that war was here, but it wasn't against the Council. Current projections show total galactic collapse within 18 months if the swarm isn't stopped. The Council is sending ships toward our blockade, another officer reported. Single courier vessel, broadcasting on all frequencies. Sarah felt her heart skip. What are they saying? They're asking for help? The room went silent. Every person present understood the magnitude of what they'd just heard. The Galactic Council, the same organization that had banished humanity, had quarantined Earth, had declared humans too dangerous for civilized space, was now begging for help. What's the message say exactly? Sarah asked. The communications officer played it. A Cathari voice, tight with desperation. To the humans of Earth, the Council acknowledges our previous decision regarding your species. We acknowledge the hardship this has caused. The galaxy now faces an extinction-level threat. We formally request military assistance. In exchange, we offer to immediately lift the exclusion zone and grant full Council membership with honors. Please respond. Admiral Zhao looked at Sarah. What do we do? She thought about the 50 years of isolation, the humiliation, the struggle, the billions of humans who had grown up knowing they'd been rejected. Part of her, the part that was still that young woman standing on the Council platform, wanted to let them suffer. Wanted to send back a message saying, you said we were too dangerous. Figure it out yourselves. But she looked at the map again, at the red stain spreading across populated space, at the death toll climbing into the trillions, at species being erased from existence. We help them, she said quietly. Not because they asked, not because they're offering us membership, but because it's the right thing to do, and because we're going to show them exactly what humans are capable of when we fight for something that matters. Admiral Zhao nodded slowly, a grim smile crossing his face. I'll scramble the first fleet. We can be at Kelros in 4 days. Not just the first fleet, Sarah said. Send everything we can spare. 2,000 ships. Show them what 50 years of preparation looks like. The orders went out within the hour. Across the solar system, the Sol Defense Fleet activated. Ships that had been built for a war that might never come suddenly had a purpose. Crews that had trained endlessly for theoretical battles now faced a real enemy. The greatest military force humanity had ever assembled began its journey toward Council space. For the first time in 50 years, human ships approached the blockade stations. The Council defense platforms didn't fire. Their weapons stayed powered down as the human fleet passed through. A river of warships flowing out of the prison that had held them for half a century. Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the Unbowed, now promoted to commander and leading a squadron of destroyers. He watched the blockade stations fall behind and thought about all the times he'd imagined breaking through them by force. Now they were simply letting him pass, and it felt hollow. He'd wanted to prove humanity's strength by overcoming the barrier. Instead, they were being let out because the Council was too weak to handle their own crisis. Well, his weapons officer said quietly, at least we get to show them what we can do. Yeah, Marcus agreed, watching the stars ahead. Stars they'd been forbidden from reaching. Let's make it count. The human fleet traveled for 4 days, moving faster than the Council had thought possible. Their fusion drives burned bright enough to be seen from a dozen light-years away. A declaration that humanity was coming and wouldn't be stopped. They arrived at Kelros Sector to find chaos. The Council's defense fleet was scattered, trying to protect evacuation ships as the swarm closed in. Millions of Rix organisms swarmed through space, consuming everything in their path. Council ships fired their elegant weapons, disabling a few organisms here and there, but for everyone they stopped, 100 more kept coming. Admiral Zhao stood in the command center of the flagship Defiance and took in the tactical situation. It was worse than the reports had suggested. The Council wasn't just losing. They were being slaughtered. He opened a channel to all human ships. All vessels, this is Admiral Zhao. We have 4,000 years of warfare in our species' history. The Council thinks that makes us savage. Today we're going to show them it makes us survivors. We're going to show them what humans do when something threatens innocent lives. We're going to show them why they should have asked for our help instead of locking us away." He paused, looking at the swarm on his tactical display. "All ships weapons-free? Kill them all." 2,000 human warships surged forward into the battle, and the galaxy learned what humanity had become in its isolation. 50 years after the banishment, Sarah Okonkwo stood on the observation deck of Olympus Station and looked down at Mars. Red had turned to brown and green. Clouds swirled in an atmosphere that hadn't existed when she was young. Rivers carved through ancient valleys, and if she looked closely, she could see the lights of New Beijing spreading across what used to be the Hellas Basin. She was 73 now, kept healthy by medical advances that had added decades to human lifespans. She had been 23 when the Council rejected humanity. She had spent her entire adult life watching her species respond to that rejection in ways no one could have predicted. The world had expected riots, wars, and collapse. Many thought humanity would tear itself apart in rage and despair. Instead, something remarkable happened. The day after the verdict, the United Earth government called an emergency session. Every nation sent representatives. For the first time in human history, there was no debate about priorities or resources or ideology. The message was simple. They had been judged and found wanting. Now they would prove the judges wrong. The unification accords were signed within a month. Every nuclear weapon on Earth was dismantled, the materials repurposed for power generation and spacecraft engines. Military budgets were redirected to a single goal: making humanity stronger, smarter, and more capable than the species that had rejected them. Not for revenge, but for survival and pride. Sarah walked through the station's main concourse, past windows showing construction sites across the solar system. Everywhere she looked, humanity was building. The asteroid belt had become a massive industrial zone, with mining facilities on every rock larger than a kilometer. Europa's ice had been melted and colonized, with cities floating in the warm ocean beneath. Titan, Callisto, Ganymede, even tiny Enceladus had human settlements now, but it wasn't just about spreading out. It was about pushing forward. Dr. Chun, now director of the Seoul Advanced Research Institute, met her for lunch at a restaurant that spun slowly to provide gravity. He looked older too, his hair completely white, but his eyes still sparkled with the same enthusiasm she remembered from that terrible day at the council. "The quantum computer network is fully operational now," he said, pulling up holographic displays between them. "We can process data at speeds the council told us were impossible. Their computers use biological neural networks, very elegant but slow. Ours use quantum entanglement. It's not elegant, but it's fast." Sarah sipped her coffee, grown in Martian soil, and studied the data. "What are we using all this computing power for?" Chun's smile widened. "Everything. We're modeling stellar dynamics to improve our fusion reactors. We're running millions of weapon simulations. We're designing ships that can cross the solar system in days instead of weeks. And we're cracking the Council's communications protocols." That made Sarah sit up straighter. "You're spying on them?" "Of course we're spying on them," Chun said, as if it were obvious. "The ghost ships have been out there for 20 years now. Small, fast, covered in stealth technology the Council doesn't even know is possible. They slip through the blockade, watch the Council species, study their technology, and come back with intelligence." He pulled up more displays showing alien ships and stations. "Here's what we've learned. The Council is soft. They haven't fought a real war in over 40,000 years. Their military exists mostly for show. Beautiful ships with impressive shields and very limited actual combat capability. Their weapons are designed to disable, not destroy, because the idea of actually killing someone is almost unthinkable to them." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "And we're designing weapons to destroy." "We're designing weapons to survive," Chun corrected. "The Council locked us in here. Sarah, they put battle stations around our home with orders to obliterate any human ship that crosses the line. We didn't start this isolation, but we're going to make damn sure we can defend ourselves if it ever ends badly." She looked out the window again. At Mars, with its new atmosphere, at the construction scaffolds surrounding what would become the largest spacecraft ever built. Humanity had taken its anger and fear and channeled it into something productive. But productive didn't always mean peaceful. Are we becoming what they accused us of being? She asked quietly. Chun was silent for a moment. Maybe we're just being honest about what we've always been. They judged us for our history of violence, but violence is a tool. It's not good or evil by itself. It depends on how you use it. He gestured at the displays. Every species in the Council has evolved past the need for conflict. They're peaceful because they've never faced a threat they couldn't handle diplomatically. But what happens when diplomacy isn't enough? Sarah didn't have an answer for that. The years continued to pass. The Sol system's population exploded as habitats were built in orbit around every planet and major moon. 50 billion humans now called the solar system home, more than had ever existed when humanity was confined to just Earth. The crowding had forced innovations in recycling, in food production, in energy generation. Every problem became an opportunity to advance. The shipyards never stopped working. The Sol defense fleet grew larger every year. Sleek warships that bore names like Defiance, Determination, and Remember. Each one was packed with weapons that would have horrified the Council. Missiles that could split into 1,000 seekers. Lasers that could cut through ship hulls like paper. Railguns that fired projectiles at percentages of light speed. And the crown jewel, plasma lances that generated temperatures, matching the core of a star, but it wasn't all weapons and warfare. Human culture flourished in isolation. Art, music, literature, philosophy all evolved in new directions, influenced by the knowledge that humanity was alone by decree rather than by circumstance. A whole generation grew up knowing that beyond the invisible wall surrounding their home, an entire galaxy of species existed that wanted nothing to do with them. That generation was angry in a way their parents weren't. They hadn't experienced the shame of the rejection firsthand. They only knew that someone out there had decided they weren't good enough, and they burned with the need to prove otherwise. Lieutenant Marcus Webb was typical of this generation. Sarah met him during a tour of the fleet. A young man of 25 who had been born in orbit around Jupiter and had never set foot on Earth. He commanded a destroyer called the Unbowed. "They think we're dangerous?" He said, his jaw set in determination. "Good, let them think that. Let them remember that humans don't forget, and we don't forgive easily. When the wall comes down, whether they tear it down or we break through it, they're going to meet a humanity that's stronger than they ever imagined." Sarah saw the fire in his eyes and recognized it. It was the same fire that had driven humanity to master tools, to tame fire, to cross oceans and continents, to reach for the moon and beyond. The Council had tried to contain that fire, but they had only concentrated it. The 50th anniversary of the banishment was marked with ceremonies across the solar system. Sarah was invited to speak at the main event, broadcast to all 50 billion humans. She stood before the cameras and told the story again. Of the journey to the Council, of the questions and accusations, of the verdict that had changed everything. "They looked at us and saw only our failures," she said. "They saw our wars and our violence and our capacity for destruction. And they were right to see those things because those things are part of who we are. But they were wrong to think that's all we are." She gestured to the screens showing images from across the solar system. Farms on Mars, cities under Europa's ice, ships being built in orbit, children being born who would never know Earth's sky. We are adaptable. We are determined. We are creative and stubborn and relentless. They tried to cage us, and instead they gave us a reason to become something greater. Whatever happens next, whatever future awaits us beyond that wall, we will face it as we've faced every challenge in our history, together, unbowed, and absolutely refusing to quit. The cheers echoed across 50 billion voices, carried by radio waves that bounced around the solar system but could not pass the blockade. Humanity was ready for whatever came next, though they didn't yet know what that would be. The shuttle descended through layers of shimmering energy shields, carrying the 5 human delegates toward the greatest structure humanity had ever witnessed. The council ring stretched across space like a silver bracelet fit for a god, massive enough to contain a dozen Earths within its circumference. Sarah Okonkwo pressed her hand against the window, her breath catching in her throat. After 300 years of looking at the stars and wondering if anyone else was out there, humanity finally had its answer. They were not alone. They were not even close to alone. The docking bay opened like a mouth, swallowing their small craft into a cathedral of metal and light. When the doors hissed open, the delegates stepped into a world that made Earth's greatest achievements look like children's toys. The air tasted strange, filtered through technologies humanity couldn't begin to understand. Gravity felt slightly off, as if the station itself was choosing how heavy they should be. Their guide was a Cathari, a being that looked like someone had stretched a mantis to the size of a basketball player and given it 4 arms. Its translator device spoke in perfect English, though the words came half a second after its mandibles clicked. "Welcome, humans of Earth. The Council will see you now." They walked through corridors where beings from 100 different worlds passed by without a second glance. Some floated. Some slithered. Some existed as clouds of glowing particles held together by force fields. Sarah realized with a sinking feeling that humanity wasn't special here. They were just another species. Late to a party that had been going on for thousands of years, the council chamber was shaped like an amphitheater, with seats rising in circular tiers around a central platform. As the human delegates took their place on that platform, Sarah looked up at the hundreds of beings staring down at them. Some had eyes. Some had sensor stalks. Some had nothing she could identify as a face at all. The weight of their attention pressed down like a physical force. The session began with introductions. Each delegate spoke about Earth, about humanity's journey from caves to cities to spacecraft. They showed images of Earth's blue oceans and green forests. They presented gifts of art and music. They tried to show the best of what humanity could be. Then came the questions of the last delegate. Its crystalline body refracting light into rainbow patterns spoke first. "Your species achieved nuclear fission in 1945 of your calendar. Within months you used it to destroy 2 of your own cities. Why should we trust beings who would do this?" Dr. James Chun, the human historian, cleared his throat. "That was during a war. A terrible war, yes, but we learned from it. We haven't used nuclear weapons in conflict since." "Because you fear destroying yourselves," a voice boomed from somewhere in the upper tiers. "Not because you have truly changed." The questions came faster after that, each one digging into the darkest parts of human history. The genocides, the religious wars, the centuries of slavery, the pollution that had nearly destroyed Earth's climate. Every mistake, every atrocity, every moment of human cruelty was laid bare under the Council's examination. Sarah tried to defend her species. "Yes, we've made terrible mistakes, but we've also grown. We've learned. In the last century alone, we've unified our world, eliminated most diseases, and reached for the stars with peaceful intentions." An ancient Morphean, a being that looked like living smoke contained in a transparent sphere, drifted forward. Its voice sounded like wind through dead leaves. "We have existed for 80,000 of your years. In that time, we have fought 3 wars. You have fought thousands. We have driven 1 species to extinction by accident. You have driven hundreds to extinction deliberately. You claim to have learned, but your history suggests you are simply between wars, not beyond them." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Sarah looked at her fellow delegates and saw the same despair in their eyes. They had come here hoping to join a community of enlightened beings, to take humanity's place among the stars. Instead, they were on trial, and the evidence against them was overwhelming. The council debated for 3 days. The human delegates waited in their assigned quarters, watching through screens as beings from across the galaxy discussed humanity's fate. Some voices spoke in their defense, arguing that all species went through violent phases. But most voices called for caution, for containment. For keeping humanity away from civilized space until they proved they could be trusted. On the third day, the verdict came. The council speaker, a towering being called a Vrenix with 6 legs and a head that looked like a flowering plant, addressed the humans directly. The Galactic Council has reached a decision. Humanity has demonstrated technological capability and intelligence sufficient for spacefaring civilization. However, humanity has also demonstrated patterns of violence, aggression, and destructive behavior that pose an unacceptable risk to the established peace of galactic society. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She knew what was coming. Therefore, the Council has voted by a majority of 847 members to establish an exclusion zone around your home system. This zone will extend 50 light years in all directions from your star. Humanity is forbidden from crossing this boundary. Any human vessel that attempts to do so will be destroyed without warning. This exclusion will remain in effect until such time as humanity can demonstrate, through observation over multiple generations, that your violent tendencies have been permanently overcome. The speaker paused, and Sarah could have sworn she saw something like sympathy in its alien features. We are sorry, but the safety of trillions of beings across thousands of worlds must take precedence. You are simply too dangerous. The journey home took 3 weeks. None of the delegates spoke much. What was there to say? They had traveled to the stars hoping to make friends and had instead been told that humanity was a disease that needed to be quarantined when their shuttle entered Earth's atmosphere. Riots were already breaking out in major cities. News of the banishment had traveled faster than they had. Earth's unified government struggled to maintain order as billions of people processed the humiliation of being rejected by the galaxy. Sarah stood before the General Assembly in New York and delivered her report. She told them about the Council, about the thousands of species who had looked at humanity and decided they wanted nothing to do with them. She told them about the exclusion zone, about the battle stations being constructed to enforce it, about the fact that humanity was now trapped in their own solar system like prisoners in a cosmic jail. They think we're savages, she said, her voice breaking. They think we're too violent, too dangerous, too broken to be trusted. And maybe they're right. But as she looked out at the assembled representatives of Earth's nations, she saw something unexpected in their faces. Not just despair or anger, but something else. Something harder, determination. The delegate from the African Union stood. If they want to lock us in a cage, fine. But they're going to regret it. We're going to show them what humans can do when we're backed into a corner. The Russian delegate nodded. We've survived ice ages and plagues and world wars. We'll survive this too. One by one, others stood and spoke. The initial shock was wearing off, and beneath it was something that had defined humanity since the first human picked up a rock to defend themselves from a predator. Stubborn, relentless refusal to give up. The banishment that was meant to contain humanity had instead given them a common enemy and a shared purpose. The Council had made their decision. Now humanity would make theirs. They would prove the Council wrong. No matter how long it took. No matter what it cost, the age of isolation had begun, but it would not break them. It would forge them into something the galaxy had never seen before.